Alright guys, so first step, we're going to be draining the coolant out of your radiator, which is this little guy here. Pull that, let all your coolant drain out. That's number one. Alright guys, next thing you're going to do is take a 14mm wrench. I believe it's 14, yeah, 14. And you'll pull your oil pan plug and drain your oil. At this point, I still have my coolant draining and my oil is done or almost done. So that's step number 2, is drain your oil. Alright guys, I got the oil and most of the coolant drained, so the next step is going to be to undo my hoses. I'm going to have one clamp here. There's the little clamp right here. And I've got 2 clamps over here on this hose. One clamp right here, and the other clamp is here. This is probably going to be the hardest part. Just figure out a way to get some pliers in there or what have you to get that off. So I'll work on that, and we'll be back in a second when I can get this done. Hey guys, I used a there's the bolt. You see that hole right there, right in the middle of the cooler. I just removed that bolt. That's a 24mm bolt. What I use, this is the bolt that'll come out of there for you. 24mm. It comes right out the middle. And what I used was a 1/2-inch breaker bar. And I did that for 2 reasons. Number one, I really kind of needed the torque to get into it, but also this line right here looks like, I guess, a power steering line. I don't know, but this line really gets in the way whenever you're trying with a regular wrench because it's straight up and down. So the breaker bar actually allowed me to go make a better angle on it. So came out pretty easy after I used the breaker bar. So next step is just to remove that and the seals. So I'll get to pulling that off of there and get to replacing those seals. Guys, so what I did here was take a flathead screwdriver, and you'll see whenever you get in there, after I pulled the bolt out, I just took a flathead screwdriver and kind of pried it behind here. It didn't take a lot of effort, but I would suggest wearing safety glasses, especially this for this part, because when it comes off, it's going to kind of pop off, and it I guess you don't really want that stuff in your eyes. So what I'm going to do is get this cleaned up, and I'll be back here shortly, and I'll have the O-rings and the O-ring and the seal, and we'll be replacing that soon. Pretty dirty there, huh? Alright, let me get this replaced. Alright guys, so what I've done here is just wiped it down with a shop towel, and you could see this O-ring. Definitely, it's kind of hard to see in the video, but those little dots along the O-rings, those are basically big pits in it. Pretty dirty in there. I'm not going to worry about it too much. This vehicle has 207,000 miles on it. It's still running fine with this leak, so I'm not going to really clean anything out of there, but you can definitely see the pitting in that O-ring, and I would bet that that's definitely where the leak is coming from. So I'm going to go ahead, try to find something to pull this out, and then the seal on the back side, we'll put the new ones in. We'll get to that in a second. Alright, so for the seal that's on this side, this is the old one here. What I did, this one's pretty easy. I just took a razor blade and just pried it underneath here, and it popped right off. So just wanted to show you how I got that one off. That one is going to be the easier of the two. There's the old seal here, and here's my new seal. So we'll get that. We'll probably just put that on the last minute whenever we go to rebolt it. I'm going to clean this up a little bit too. Flip this over and try to work out that other O-ring. Alright, as you can see, this is not coming out easily. I hope when you do this, maybe you have a better way to do it than me, or if you have anything any ideas to help somebody else out, just post it. But basically I am cutting it with a razor blade and then kind of pulling it out. It does not want to come out in one piece. So what I'm going to do now is take a break, go eat some pizza with my wife and kid, and I will be back on this later afternoon. Alright guys, finally got that old seal out and put the new seal in. Tried to clean this up a little bit. Put a little layer of motor oil on this O-ring, and then also just coated the surface with some motor oil as well. This is the bolt that's going to go through the middle from this backside like this, and then the seal. Got the seal right here. I'm going to take that out of the bag here in a couple of seconds. Go ahead and put it on this bolt, and that's the seal between the outside of the oil cooler and this 24mm bolt that goes to the middle to hold that in. So gonna go ahead and get started on that. Whenever you go to replace this, this little shape right here is going to be facing towards the back of the vehicle. So there's the front of my vehicle. It's going to go in just like this. So this is going to head towards the back of the vehicle. These two guys are on the top side of it. So going to go ahead and get underneath here, finish getting the bolt installed and getting it torqued down. I believe it's 53 feet-pounds of torque. I'll post the manual on this link or on this thread. So that's that. Once I get that done, I'll give you another shot of the inside, and then we'll be replacing. The only hoses I took off were these two. I didn't actually take the hoses off and uninstall them. I just unclamped them from these, popped them off. So when I go to do that, I'll just pop them back on and clamp them back up, and we should be good to go. I'm not going to be replacing those. So there you go. We'll get started on that, and hopefully this goes smoothly. Alright guys, so I got everything installed again, and I'm going to show you how I did it. It was a little tricky to get that bolt threaded. So what I did was I went ahead and threaded or put the bolt through the oil cooler, and then pushed it all the way in, and then held the oil cooler up there, and I had a headlamp on. I could see to make sure the O-ring stayed seated correctly. And then also you can, you have to have this bolt really straight or really at a perpendicular angle to the threads to get it started correctly. So having this little space between the block and the cooler, allowed me to make sure I was matching those threads up correctly. And then lastly, there's a little groove. Let's see if we can get this right here on the block. See if I can't get that to, here we go. Well, right there, there's at the tip of the screwdriver, there's a little bitty groove on the block. You got to make sure that this little Y looking piece goes around that. So that's it, and I torqued it down. Hose clamps a lot easier to get on than they were off. Make sure you put the hoses back on the correct spot and get those clamps pushed back on there correctly. So now I'm gonna fill her up with oil and coolant, change my oil filter, this bad boy, and fingers crossed everything works correctly. Alright guys, a couple things you're gonna need for the job. 5-gallon bucket to collect coolant. You'll need a torque wrench to properly torque the main bolt that holds on, or the only bolt that holds on the oil cooler. You're going to need to change your oil, or I recommend changing it at the same time you do this. So you'll need something to take your oil filter off and install your new one. You'll need a regular pair of pliers. I used the smallest pair I could find because it's a pretty tight space, and I have pretty big hands. These are going to be for your hose clamps to remove those and reinstall them. Breaker bar to get that initial torque taken off of there on that bolt. It's a 24mm bolt. You won't need a deep socket. Toyota coolant, you're going to spill some, so you want to make sure you have a little extra. to replace what you've spilled, so I had that on hand there. Flathead screwdriver to help pry the oil cooler off once you have the bolt taken off. New oil filter, oil, and also 14 millimeter socket to take the oil drain plug out of there. I also use this for a lot of the slack in the bolt for the oil cooler. This is a 3/8 drive, the 1/2 inch drive. I use this because it was a tighter fit, just to get the bolt in most of the way, and then once I had it pretty tight, I used the breaker bar to get it a lot tighter, and then finally the torque wrench to get it tightened down the final amount. So there you go.